So now that we've cut out our blade, the first thing we need to do is take care of some cleanup along the edges. And I've already done mine, but what I've done basically is, after I've cut it, I just cut all my stuff with a coping saw. Cut it out with a hand saw basically, and the coping saw tends to wobble a little bit, and I can't cut straight to save my life. So I had some nice wavy lines along the edge of the blade, and so I needed to clean those up first before I went any further. So all I did was I took a rasp, which is, I'll show it to you here in just a second. This guy, and this is like a file or a rasp. It's got one curved side and a flat side, and this side of it is rough, both sides, and this is a smoother grit. So what I did is I just took that and ran it up and down the edges to kind of take away some of the bumps and grooves, and make sure I had these nice crisp lines going down the blade, and for this curvature here. The important thing about the rasp, we're using sandpaper with a block behind it, not just sandpaper. If you just use sandpaper, you're going to wind up smoothing out the surface of it, but you're not actually going to shape the surface. So you'll actually just have a really smooth, bumpy line, as opposed to actually shaping and removing the wood where you want to remove it from, so that you have these nice crisp lines. So it's important when you're actually shaping and not smoothing or sanding down the wood, it's important that you actually use a rigid object to shape it with, whether it be a rasp, an X-Acto knife, or a utility knife, or a sandpaper with a piece of block or something behind it for a firm surface. So once you've got the cleanup all taken care of, and the other thing I wanted to tell you is that on the tang, I changed this. It was 1 inch. I initially had it cut out for 1 inch, but instead I'm going to change it to 3/4 because I changed my mind. And that's just for later, so when we actually make our handle, it'll actually slide on, rather than before I was planning on gluing it to the surface once the hilt slid up here. And this way it'll be a lot better for us if we make a mistake. So change this to 3/4 inch, which means you have to subtract, if it was 1 inch before and it's 3/4, you need to subtract 1/8 of an inch from from either side. So 1/8 of an inch from this side and from that side, so that it's still centered along our line. And again, that's just going to be 3/4 wide all the way down instead of 1 inch. Still the same length. But yeah, so once we've got it all cut out and cleaned up, we need to start shaping it. Now, just a few notes. I wanted to go over a little bit of blade geometry. Basically, we're going with an in-game version, and this is a retexture project that I showed you guys earlier, but it still shows the kind of the blade geometry that we're looking at. And what I wanted to point out primarily was this nice edge that you see. It's a nice defined edge. So we want to make sure that we include that in our prop. The other thing that's pretty important is that it's got this ridge right in the middle, and of course this fuller groove right down the middle. And then this is actually going to be part of the hilt, this piece that's on top here. But those are the three things, the three biggest things in the shaping of this blade is going to be 1, this fuller groove, 2, the fact that there's a ridge right down the middle, and 3, this really defined edge along the outside. Now, how we're going to accomplish this is that some of you who, if this is your first time woodworking or something, and you're not real well versed with your tools, you can just do a simple edge. Get a picture over here. Basically, we've got our stock piece of wood that's just going to be squared and squared. Now, you can do a simple edge, which is literally going to just, chop these off, chamfer the edges there, and you'll have a nice defined edge like we see in the picture. But it'll be flat on the top and the bottom. It will not provide us that ridge that goes the length of the blade right in the center. But it will give you this nice defined edge. The other thing we can do is we can kind of do a beveled edge. Now this will be fairly simple to do, not quite as simple as a simple edge, but this beveled edge will still give the blade some overall shape that's not just squares and rectangles, but it will neither give you a center ridge nor will it give you a real defined blade edge like we see in the picture. It won't, you know, catch the light and show that edge. It will have an edge, as you can see, but it won't be really defined just looking at it. Next thing, which is what we're going to try and do, is kind of create this complex edge geometry, which is consisting of two angles, which is basically a shallow angle that will give us this big ridge right down the middle, and then a sharper edge, or a sharper angle on the end, creating the actual blade edge, which will give us both the nice defined edge and that ridge down the middle. And again, just a blow up of that is, again, you've just got this shallower angle, which would normally meet way out here, and then we're just going to shape the final edge there as well. And how we're going to do that is we're just going to basically mark the edge of our blade, the edge of the sword blade that we've cut out, into thirds, roughly. This is not an exact measurement, of course, but if this is the edge of the piece of wood, looking at it this way, of course, we're just going to run a pencil line down in thirds, and then this is going to be the middle of the blade, and we're just going to shape it with our file down to that line so that this whole section is going to be gone, and the same on the other half. Now this will give us a real blunt edge on the end here, but will give us this first shallow angle, and that way you don't have to measure an angle, you're just meeting a line from here that you're going to draw and your center line down the blade. So that takes all the math out of it for you. You're just going to do this nice shallow edge. And then we're going to come back in. You're going to go from this square edge, that's all that's left, this nice square edge, and you're going to just put a center line down the middle of it. And come in, whatever you think is necessary, really. I mean, I just kind of look at the edge there and I can kind of freehand that, you know, not sure what that is. But that looks pretty good for a good, nice defined edge, and you can compare it to a picture if you want. Whatever you see fit for this distance in from the edge of the wood, both here and there, top and bottom. And then just do a shortcut right to the middle. So that'll be a real abrupt angle, real sharp angle on the edge. And doing this is kind of a complicated step. It kind of complicates things a little bit. You can do any of these shapes that, well, obviously you could do that one, but don't do the square piece. It won't have an edge. But, yeah. You could do any of these, and you can still do the tutorial with it. You'll just have to make a little bit of change later on. But we'll get there. But I think this will actually give you the best look of your sword if you just have this complex edge. Like I said, because it'll give you that shape. Now, because we're using such a wide piece of wood, that's going to be 3 inches wide, that angle is not going to be real obvious. I mean, you can see I've started shaping it, and you really, I mean, it's not a huge difference. So, I mean, you may look at a later video when this is all going to be done and see what kind of difference it made on mine, and you can choose to go about trying to do it or not, because it is an extra step, it's a complication to kind of add a little bit of sophisticated look to it. But you may not think it's worth the trouble, and that's fine. But once you've done that, shaped the blade how you want it, then from there we're going to do our middle fuller groove here, and I'll do that in the next video. But after that, your blade will pretty much be shaped. Now, the thing you want to be careful of is down here. Like I said, you can see where I drew the 2 lines there dividing the edge up into thirds, and I'm just shaping it down with a file. The other cool thing about doing kind of this complex geometry, it will actually accentuate your curves a little bit if you hold it up to the light, and that's because the angle is actually going to be sharper between this shorter distance than it will be up here for this wider distance. So, I mean, like I said, it's kind of a complication to the project, but I think it'll look a lot better when it's all done. But yeah, so it's all cut out, it's all cleaned up, and I'm going to get busy trying to finish up the rest of this shaping. And before that way you can make a decision as to whether or not you actually want to go through a complex geometry, if you just want to do a basic geometry.